Danny was born in Oklahoma and received his bachelor's degree from Oklahoma State University. Then he got to Texas as quick as he could and earned his master's in school administration and doctorate in educational leadership from Stephen F. Austin. Danny's taught science, he's coached, he's been an assistant principal, a curriculum director, and a superintendent of schools in Jasper, Burkeville, Evadale, and High Island. 18 years ago, he said he was blessed to be hired by Region 5 Education Service Center, and he is currently the executive director. In addition to the day-to-day operation of Region 5, his duties include conducting around 50 workshops per year for school boards, faculty, and administrative teams. He also has a monthly meeting with superintendents from the 19, I believe that's right, 37 school districts that Region 5 serves, and I'm sure that's kind of like herding cats. Shannon's not here, I'm good. He also conducts superintendent searches and has served as an adjunct professor at Lamar University. He's also my wife's boss, so please give him a very good welcome, Dr. Danny Levesque.
Thank you, John. Pleasure to be here. It's been a while, and it's good to see everybody. And I do have to start with an apology. I would never come to Rotary not dressed better than this, but no power when I left the house this morning. And just so you know, I put a chainsaw in the truck because I wasn't sure I could get out of the neighborhood without it. So I apologize for not gussying up a little better, but I'm looking forward to sharing with you some thoughts about what the schools have dealt with since a year ago March and what we're doing moving forward. And I've got some talking points here behind me, and we'll jump right into that. We're going to discuss these areas. We're going to look at what it was like on education instruction overall, going to look at the impact on students, look at the impact on teachers. Obviously, there was a big parental impact on this. If any of you had kids in school in the last year, you know you've been drafted into as an educator as well. And then some of the efforts from the Texas Education Agency, the governor, the legislature, and then some national things that are going on. So my job today is for you to leave here with a better idea, a sort of behind the scenes look at what the schools have been doing, how they've gone about it, and hopefully how we're going to move forward from this point so that when you're asked, you can talk about it with some knowledge that maybe the general public doesn't have. So let's just start with education and instruction. Beginning last March, schools were asked at the drop of a hat to do something they were not equipped to do. They were asked to send kids home and then address their instruction remotely. And they went about that a couple of different ways. You see that asynchronous versus synchronous and old school versus new tech. Well, basically what happened at every school in the state of Texas is kids went home and schools addressed their learning needs either synchronously, which means just what we're doing on Zoom today, right? Real time, teacher somewhere with the internet, kids at home on a device, I'm teaching, you're responding, and we're doing that real time. Problem was not everybody had a device, not everybody had internet, not everybody was fixed up and capable to do that. So the other type of remote instruction we did was called asynchronous. And asynchronous instruction meant not real time. It basically meant what you and I did if we caught the flu 30 years ago, right? The school sent some packets home and you were at the house doing some worksheets, doing something like we used to do. And then the school would actually come by and pick those up, or you would mail them back in and the teacher would grade those after hours. So that's just a brief snapshot of where we were, not this past March, but March a year ago when everybody went home for the first time. Well, as quick as we could, we got geared up to do the remote, to do the online, to do the real time. And everybody thought, you guys, it was a common thought that, wow, you know, kids today, what do people my age say? These kids are so techie, right, Teresa? We call them digital natives because they've been living with the internet their whole life. And surely they're going to be just wonderful and awesome when we get them in front of a computer and we're going to do school all day. And that was not true, because I don't know about you, I got a 21-year-old, and even at 21, when we think about kids being techie, they are. My daughter is on her phone. She's on Snapchat for 5 minutes, and then she's on Instagram, and then she's looking at something on YouTube, and then she's throwing a little bit in Facebook because Facebook's for old people, and then she's off to something else. Well, that's techie, but you guys, that's a lot different from sitting still for 45 minutes, listening to a teacher, paying attention, and then taking a 10-minute break and doing it again. And kids were not good at that. I would say as many as 95% of the kids were not suited for that. They don't have the self-discipline for that. And it was awful in the beginning. And guess what? As you can see up here too, you know, the physical needs, you know, a lot of what kids get at school are more than just instruction. For a lot of our kids, those, and I got a lot of educators in the room that I recognize, for a lot of those kids, that's where they get breakfast and lunch. And if they weren't going to school, they don't get breakfast and lunch, or what they do get certainly isn't what they need. And then you think of the physical activity, the recreation, the exercise. You know, when you and I weren't in school, we were running up and down creeks and chasing things and playing ball and doing all those types of things. Again, today, that's not what kids do when they're not in school. They're sitting in front of a TV, a lot of them, not all, and they're on video games, and they're doing things that are sedentary in nature. So for a lot of our kids, the only physical activity they get is at school. And that didn't used to be the case. So when you look at the student impact on this screen, and by the way, that last thing there, a lot of times for our kids, they don't go to the doctor. The best health care they ever get is a school nurse. So for all of these reasons, students struggled, and they struggled whether they were synchronous, asynchronous, they weren't prepared. So from March, a year and a half ago, through May, we struggled through, and we learned things, and we geared up, and then we had a whole summer to prepare. And starting in the fall of this year, we came back and we did a much better job, not just teachers and schools, but students as well, and parents. We'll talk about them in a moment also. So the next big thing, you may have to click me back there if I can't advance. Can you move me forward? Okay, thank you. So the next big impact was obviously on teachers. And you know what? I've still got a teaching certificate. I tell people all the time, if all else fails, if Region 5 kicks me to the curb, I'm a composite science teacher. I can still teach physics and chemistry, and any school in here would hire me in a heartbeat because you can't find those teachers. But you know what? That doesn't mean I'm qualified to teach via Zoom platform. I mean, it's different. And so our teachers had to gear up for that. And over the summer, you know what? They really did. And they did a good job. And for our younger teachers, and again, I'm stereotyping a bit, but for our younger teachers, a lot of them took that like a duck to water. A lot of them have been educated through online courses, right? And so that wasn't bad. But for a lot of teachers my age, and a lot of teachers you guys are my age, and ladies, it wasn't easy. You know, if you've been teaching 35, 40 years face-to-face, and now you're in front of a computer screen at home, that's some new skills to learn. So teachers had an impact too. They worked in a new environment. They had no time to prep last spring, but they had all summer. So starting this fall, they did a better job. It's still not perfect. If any of you have kids at home, you know that. But it was much better than it was last spring. Interesting thing, a lot of people say, well, is it easier? Well, it depends kind of on how big a school you are. If you're a rural school, I mean, you heard those schools where I worked, right? Burkeville, Evadale, High Island. You know, you don't have enough teachers. If half your kids are at school and half your kids are at home, guess what? You're teaching both. That means you're a teacher. You're wrangling kids in front of you, and then you're looking on screen to see who's gone off and disappeared on the Zoom. And that doubled teachers' workloads. And I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying that absolutely doubled their workload. In some of our larger districts, it was a little better because they had enough faculty that they could dedicate. You, ma'am, are going to teach all online because you love online and you're techie. And you, sir, you prefer face-to-face. That's okay. We've got enough kids coming to school that, Doug, you're going to teach just kids face-to-face. And so that helped. And again, that was more effective. But particularly for our rural and our smaller schools, it was a monumental task. Couple that with the fact that in our rural areas all over Texas, but even here in East Texas, they don't have reliable internet. If you've ever been on a Zoom with a sketchy internet, you know how fun that can be. So all of these things were the impact that teachers faced. And the other big thing was substitutes. You know, majority of our subs in most schools are often retired people. The pandemic, as we all know, was hard and more threatening the older you were. So it became also almost impossible to get substitutes to pile up on all these other issues. So those are some of the behind the scenes things that teachers faced. But absolutely, the teachers and the kids weren't the only ones living in a brave new world, right? So what about the impact on parents? I mean, my gosh, you know, balancing work with childcare. At the end of the day, you know, no matter what, kids go to school and parents go to work, and that's been that way for decades. Well, all of a sudden, kids were at home. And some parents had to choose between work and childcare. Some had to juggle and try to do both. And again, just like with those teachers in those small schools, you end up not doing a great job at either one often. So, boy, parents were learning things and learning Zoom and trying to wrangle kids. And particularly if you've got 3 school-age kids at home, to do a decent job on remote instruction, they need to be in 3 different rooms because they've got 3 different lessons on 3 different devices. One might be on a phone, one might be on an iPad, and thank goodness we've got 1 laptop in the house. And so that was a struggle for parents, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, so I won't spend a lot of time on that. But all of those things, as the year has gone on, we've gotten better. And schools, as you know, more and more throughout the past year, the percentage of kids attending face-to-face has risen. Couple of things, well, I'll talk about that on the next slide, but as we kind of leave the parents behind, just the fact that the stress they were under, the costs to families that could afford to get devices for kids who are maybe paying for a better internet to try to keep it up and going, or having to buy a MiFi or whatever technology needed, and balancing that with just your personal beliefs about what is safe for our kids, because that was a personal thing. Some people, you know, they interpret it as, you know, it is okay for my kid to go to school, and that's great. And some people also interpreted it that I just can't in good conscience send my kid to school because I'm worried about the health aspect. And then everybody was dealing with all those issues. It was as they used to say, Barney used to say on Andy Griffith, right? It's just a mess, Ange. It's a mess. So what did we do, and who helped the schools? What kind of help did the schools get from the state, from the region, and from the feds? So, you know what, Region 5, I know it's not real well known what we do. Sometimes people think we're a part of TEA, or sometimes people think we're a part of BISD. Well, we're actually a quasi-governmental entity. There are 20 of us across the state of Texas because Texas is so large. I work directly for the Commissioner of Education, but I also have my own board of directors, just like your school has a school board. But the bottom line is regional education service centers do whatever schools need. We are a service center. We support them. We're not the principal. We're not TEA. We don't enforce things. But if a school has a problem, we fix it. We help them to know how to make it right. So we were behind the efforts in a lot of areas. We were there to help them with instruction. I have an incredible staff. John's wife is one of those people. And we were out there showing people, here's how technology can work. Here's how you can do a better job on Zoom. Here's how you can deliver instruction that will keep a kid engaged. Then we were also the people out there with the actual technology. I have a wonderful technology staff who's helping schools with the bandwidth, the hardware, the software. Region 4 in Houston, my counterpart in Houston, who's huge, they're as much bigger as I am, than Houston is bigger than Beaumont. They actually led a statewide effort where they got schools free devices. So most of your schools here in Region 5, if a year ago March, they didn't have a device for every child, and now all of a sudden they do, that was probably done through Region 5, and those devices were free. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you millions of devices were distributed, and basically across the state of Texas, with the last number I saw of 5.4 million students, every student has the opportunity to have some kind of a device that they can work on. That still doesn't mean they have internet. We'll talk about that when I get to the federal slide. Feeding. I have a staff at Region 5 that works with all the school cafeterias, and we were helping them through all the regulations. If you know your local school was feeding kids, your kids could go to school, pick it up. Some of your schools early on were delivering meals in school buses to your house. All of that ran through the Region 5 feeding program, where we combined with Texas Department of Agriculture to get the agriculture to have those meals paid for and to help schools figure out how to distribute them. If you were to ask me, Danny, who is the most underappreciated group of educators that had an impact on this pandemic? Your school cafeteria, you know, the cafeteria ladies, as we call them, they did a Herculean job to get out there and do an incredible effort to keep your kids fed even when they were home. And I'm watching my time here. Somebody wave at me if I'm going long. But the accounting for all this, the money that flowed, we helped schools with that. Well, what about Texas Education Commissioner, Texas Education Agency and Commissioner of Education, Mike Morath? Accountability. You know, we did away with the STAR test last year. I mean, there was no STAR test the year before. And like it or not, there is a STAR test this year, but it doesn't, for lack of a better term, count for either your school's accountability or your individual child. You can be on either side of that issue. All I can tell you is from the commissioner's standpoint, they just want the data. We don't know where to pick kids up and move them forward if we don't know how far they've fallen behind. So that's the intent behind the STAR. I won't even get into whether I agree that kids should be stressing over the STAR with all they've been through, but at least it was with good intention, and I do understand the logic behind it. Devices, I already talked about that they ran through Region, those came from TEA, but they ran through Region 4. Funding, man, has the money flowed, and it really flowed starting about a month ago. I'll touch on that on my last slide. And then communication and guidelines for all the COVID protocols. You know, you got 1,200 and on any given day, about 58 school districts in Texas, and the campuses go into the tens of thousands. And we had to try to get those kids and those schools some common protocols, and we failed miserably. Because especially a year ago in March, because I was talking to superintendents every day that said, TEA says this, and my local county health organization says this, and the county judge just put something out that said something different. At the end of the day, they were all doing their best, and it was just a mess, Ange. It was a mess. But we did the best we could, and coming to this point now, in May of 2021, those things have steadied out a little bit. They're more consistent. Schools are doing things more consistently. So all of those were efforts that came from Texas Education Agency and the Commissioner of Education. What about the legislature and the governor? The first thing the legislature and the governor did that was awesome is they put a hold harmless in effect for school funding, because I don't know if you know this. I think I spoke about this at Rotary a few years back. Schools get paid not as much by your property taxes as you think. Schools get paid according to how many kids are in school, right, Joe? And if your kids, you don't get paid because they're enrolled, you get paid on their average daily attendance. And so when 40%, and yes, a year ago, March, 40% of kids just disappeared. I'm not talking they weren't in schools. I'm talking they disappeared and we couldn't find them. That would have meant schools had to lose 40% of their funding. They did not. The legislature held them harmless. That's extended through the end of this school year. That was a monumental effort by the legislature, and I promise you it made a huge difference in every school in the state of Texas. Local health authorities, closures, talk about that. But what about PPEs? Man, so we got to coordinate this, the 20 education service centers in Texas, and we distributed, again, I'm not exaggerating, millions of masks, sanitizer, face shields, thermometers, and we had semis of these things. I got to just tell you, I'm a farm kid, and years ago, I knew how to wrangle a forklift. I got to drive a forklift for 2 full days unloading semis and schools coming by, and horse trailers, trucks if they had them, pickups, cars, vans, and unloading semi loads of PPEs and giving it to schools for free. And we did that twice over the last year. And again, the number of masks alone were in the millions just here in Region 5. And we did that for the whole state of Texas. That's something the 20 Education Service Centers did. So all of those things were state efforts to help schools get through this incredible situation. Well, the feds have also had a big hand in this, and some of it, you know, I think we all at some point like to gripe about the CDC, but I don't want their job. Yeah, you know, I haven't sent an application in to run the CDC during a pandemic yet, so I'm not going to be, you know, too critical. They've tried to be consistent, I guess, to the best of their ability and made those guidelines and recommendations. And from the school standpoint, everything starts there. And then from there, they go down to local things and other layers of how to keep kids safe during a pandemic. U.S. Department of Education has helped by waiving accountability. Just as TEA waived the STAR test last year, the U.S. Department of Education waived their accountability measures as well during the pandemic, and that helped a lot. But federal funding programs, and I'm kind of going to wind it up here because I wanted to leave today. I wanted to give you a picture of where we're going. Hopefully I've given you a picture of where we've been, but where do we go from here? Well, I'm not sure where we're going, but we got some money to get us there. And let me just give you, I can be pretty accurate for our slice of Texas. So Region 5 consists of 37 school districts. We start on the west side. If you go to High Island, come up through East Chambers, swing out and gather in Holday, Zeta, and up the west side, Koontz, up 69, all the way to Chester. You go across the north end to Brooklyn, Burkeville, Jasper, all the way over to the Louisiana line, swing down to Orange, and all the way down the coast back to High Island. That's our slice of Texas. We have the southeast corner, 37 school districts, about 95 to 100,000 kids. And as far as federal funding goes, $11 billion was released about 3 weeks ago. And Region 5's share of that is $174 million. Just, yes, absolutely. And I say Region 5 share, don't get me wrong, I don't get a dime, but the schools do, and that's how we exist. They pay us to come help them do things. And just to give you a snapshot, Beaumont ISD getting $57 million. Port Arthur's getting 27. You know, a school the size of Jasper's getting 7 and change. Now, it depends. You can have two schools the same size. You might be living in Hampshire Fannett, and you look at Hardin Jefferson, you say, why are we so different from Hardin Jefferson? Well, that money flows on a funding formula based on your percentage of low socioeconomic kids. So the more poor kids you serve, the bigger slice of that pie you get. And you guys, that's how federal funding always works, right, Teresa? So, but that's great. That's more money than we've had since Hurricane Rita. And I can tell you, as someone who lived with that, the magic we did putting things together after Hurricane Rita was largely due to $50 million we got at that time. So you think about 174 and what we can do with that. That money has to be dedicated to learning loss recovery. So let me leave you with this so you know the challenge facing your schools in the next year. About 4 months ago, it was estimated statewide, because what are we trying to get a handle on? How far have kids fallen behind, right? We got to know where they're at if we're going to move them forward. About 4 months ago, TEA's best estimate based on data they have is that kids since March a year ago have lost about 4 months of learning. Now you might think, wow, Danny, it's been a terrible time. That's not that bad. Let me tell you this, as somebody who's been in education 39 years, if you can pick up a month of lost learning in one school year, you've done an incredible job. So that's the kind of questions I get all the time. Danny, I know it's bad. How bad is it? I say, it's pretty bad. They say, well, how long do you think it would take us to catch up? I'm here to tell you today, if the state of Texas can catch kids up in 4 years, they've done a Herculean wonder. I've said Herculean several times today. I may have watched Kevin Sorbo last night. That's all. Only people who watch Hercules. Okay. But anyway, I digress. If we can catch these kids up in 4 years, we've done an incredible job. That money is going to help, because that money must be dedicated, like all federal funds. It comes with strings, not as many strings as usual, but it's still got strings. It's got to be dedicated to learning loss recovery in some way, shape, or form. That can be technology, that can be hiring new teachers, that can be training them up on new skills. But again, in my experience in a long time doing what I do, if you can catch a kid up, in other words, if you can put 13 months of learning in a 12-month calendar year, you've done a great job. If we are 4 months behind statewide, we got 4 hardworking, powerful years ahead of us. And you know what? I think we can do it. But it's going to take everybody's help. That's why I was really glad they asked me to spend a little time with you today. I hope I haven't been up here too long, but please spread that word. As parents and business people and leaders in the community, let everybody you talk to know the school's got a big job ahead of them, and they're going to be gearing up to do it, and it's not going to be fixed overnight. But with everybody pitching in, we can get it fixed. And 4 years from now, hopefully we'll have every kid in the state of Texas right back where they should have been. And I'll be glad to answer. I don't think I've got anything else. Yes, I will be glad to answer any questions. Yes, sir. Yep, it is. Yeah. Yeah. Let me restate for anybody on the Zoom that couldn't hear the question. The question is, there's no doubt. I mean, part of it's just demographics, right? I'm a baby boomer. Baby boomers were already retiring in droves, and they are the largest section of the teaching population in the state, and I assume the nation. And his question was, even more teachers are retiring because of the pandemic and burnout. I mean, we talked today about how bad the burnout is and what teachers have been through. And you're exactly right. One of the things that I have said to the commissioner personally, and I'll tell anybody that listens, the biggest resource we have in Texas right now is recently retired teachers. If I'm a superintendent and I'm getting millions of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars of funding, I'm aiming that money towards people. And the fertile field, I'm a farmer's kid, the fertile field that I'd be plowing would be recent retirees. Number one, they already know what they're doing. And number two, a lot of them retired a little earlier than maybe they wanted to. You give them a month or a year off to catch their breath and get their energy back. And I've got money to hire those people. So the biggest blessing in my mind of the money I just spoke about coming to the schools here in Texas, if I'm a superintendent, the most valuable asset you have is personnel. I'd be out there searching specifically for retired teachers with special skill sets. Because just as he said, you guys, here's what it's like in Texas today. Here's what I said about me being a science teacher. If I post a high school physics job and I get 1 applicant in 5 months, I'm lucky. If I post a high school calculus job or a Spanish teacher job or special ed, those 4 areas, right, Joe? Is that what y'all faced at Beaumont, right? Math, science, special ed, and Spanish. They're just not there. I mean, they are chupacabra. And I tell you what, we heard a few. There we go. So I tell you what I started hearing just in the last 2 or 3 years that I never heard before. Superintendent Woodville 2 years ago called. I said, I called him. I said, middle of summer, how's your hiring going? He said, Danny, we got 2 kindergarten positions posted and no applicants. And you guys, if you're in education, you post a kindergarten first, second, because there's no STAR test there. We used to get 50 applicants, you know? So there, it's like that movie Twister. People say, is there a teacher shortage coming? You say, it's already here. But see, I'm doing lots of movie and TV trivia today for y'all. But yeah, so the good news is what he's saying is absolutely true. There's a huge shortage and it's worse than it's ever been. Boy, when I saw that money coming into Southeast Texas, that's my first thought. I'm fixing to go out and I'm going to bring that across like a topwater lure and some of those recently retired people and try to drag them back in the doors. Because once you've let off, and I'll come to you, once you've laid out a month, you can come back and work half-time and still get your retirement. Once you've laid out a full calendar year, you can come back and work full-time and get 6 of your 12-month retirement checks. So there's fertile ground to be plowed for recent retirees. Yes, I think almost every school is planning for that. I don't want to generalize and say every school, but I think most schools are planning for that. Absolutely. Yeah, where's the best place to make up a month's worth of learning is grab them in the summer. Absolutely. Great question. Yes, sir.
Since there is such a teacher shortage and since science and math teachers are so hard to find, has anybody looked at, like in Burkeville, why couldn't kids in their science class go into a room where there's a teacher in Beaumont
Yes.
that is doing double duty that gets paid a stipend for that? So you don't have to hire them.
He's absolutely right. If you couldn't hear him, he said, what about remote learning? What if Beaumont's got science teachers and Burkeville doesn't? Can Burkeville just Zoom in and get them? Absolutely. Schools are doing that already. Just to give you an example, you guys, I mentioned Spanish teachers are hard to get. I have 11 full-time Spanish teachers that work for me at Region 5, and they teach kids all across Texas exactly like that because schools can't find Spanish teachers. We've been doing this for 12 or 13 years now, and we're teaching kids in West Texas because they can't find a Spanish teacher out there, so they're signing up with us, and we're doing that already. These are great looks behind the curtain at things schools are already doing that the general public just often it doesn't realize. So great. Thank you, John. Anything else? Yes, sir. Yeah. So the question is, what percentage of schools are fully open? Right now, actually, they all are. But they're also, if you want to keep your kids home, they're still serving you. With the exception of one, maybe two schools in the whole region, they've been open. In other words, for a while now, if every kid in district wanted to come back to school, school was ready, good to go. But they're still also serving those kids who want to stay home or whose parents want them to be home. Yes. So schools have it. That's a good question. His question was, will that option go away? And the answer is no. Schools have the choice. There will be schools moving forward who will always offer that virtual option from now on, because again, how do schools get paid? They get paid by the number of students. There are other schools, if they're in an area where basically all the kids have come back to the school or 99% of the kids have come back, you know, they won't just because there's no need. But every school now has the option going forward and the ability, because of what we've been through, to do that, to do both at school face-to-face and remote instruction. Yes, sir. Yeah, the first and the biggest is the same thing you're doing here today. I mean, we'll have that remote option from now on. Just for an example, I mean, I'm an organization that we run about 19,000 teachers a year through Region 5 for training. Well, we geared up with new technology as soon as this happened. I mean, by a year ago, May, everything we now do, we have the equipment and the ability. I can teach a class to you sitting here in front of me at the exact same time. I'm streaming live to anybody who wants to Zoom in. And I have the capability to record that and send a link out to anybody who couldn't be here at that time but wants that class. Schools will be doing the exact same thing. I'll tell you the biggest benefit to come out of this in my mind, two things. One of them you're seeing today. I'll come back to that. But how much learning loss did we used to have when kids just got sick and stayed home, right? What did we say earlier? Going to send some worksheets home. Maybe they did them. Maybe they didn't. Not anymore. We'll Zoom those kids in. You're home with the flu. Stay home. Don't come to school with a fever. Log on to your device, and we'll educate you right there at your house in real time. The second way we've really gotten better for us in Southeast Texas, remember, you get paid by whether or not kids are attending. Do y'all know what Beaumont and Port Arthur are doing today? Because of what the weather forecast was like, they're remote. They're not losing a day's funding. You know, Beaumont's not losing 20,000 kids worth of money for one day out of 180 days of school year. They just switched to remote. And for us that have just been hammered by hurricanes since Rita, Wow, how much better will that be? Still got to get the internet up, right? Which that takes a little bit, but I know my internet's been up when my house was still flooded after Harvey. So if we can get kids on the internet, we can have kids being educated. That is a boon or a bonus we've had from what we've been through. Great question. Yes, ma'am. I have a lot personally, and I think it's the school's job to communicate that. Remember my first slide, recess. I mean, kids need recess. We didn't, in my opinion, you grew up on a farm like me, you didn't need recess. You go haul hay because your dad made you. That's not real common nowadays. So I think recess, PE, the social interaction of team sports, the social interaction of just being around your kids. Make no mistake, there's probably 5% of the kids in the state that have flourished under remote because they're that kid that's, they've got the personality and everything. But the majority of our kids, I think we all agree, need social interaction. They need social skills. And the biggest place they get those typically is at school. Mr. Bo, I've got to get off here, don't I? Two things. Every school's target's 97%. Every school out there is shooting for 97%, and they're probably all somewhere between 96 and 98 most years. Now, in the pandemic, we did right off the bat, we lost about 40%. Now, we learned more as we went on. As bad as that sounded, it doesn't sound as bad to me today, because you know what the majority of those kids were? Out of that 40%, maybe 75, 80% of those kids were pre-K, K, and 1. Why does that mean to me it's not that bad? Because I got time to get those kids caught up. If I'm losing juniors and seniors, and I just told you it take you 4 years to get them back, they're never getting back. If they graduate, they're going to graduate less than they ever would have been. So the majority of the kids we've lost have been very young. The good news about that is we can get them back, and we've got time to get them caught up. So that's a big deal too. And then an online question.
Yes, this is Alan Higgins. I was curious, you mentioned earlier that some school districts are borrowing Spanish teachers through their Zoom meetings. I was just curious if those school districts are being charged part of that teacher's salary.
Yeah, actually they're paying the whole salary. That's my program, and that's how we've built it over 12 years. I don't get any state funding for that, but yes, that's a great question. Yeah, we charge what we need to pay that salary. We are nonprofit. We don't make money off that program, but we charge the schools by student whatever it takes for us to pay for that teacher. And obviously we've got a very high-end setup. I mean, we've got some Star Wars looking things that those people teach on, because they've got green screens behind them. And I mean, it looks like a very professional thing. After 12 or 13 years, we're really good at it. But yeah, the only way we get that funded is the schools pay us for that teacher, just as if they'd pay to hire their own. Great question. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Levitt. I took so many notes today. I wrote Herculean task down when he said it the first time, but it truly was a Herculean task, and I appreciate you sharing it from the student perspective, the teacher perspective, and the parent perspective, because you have to think about all those things and all the challenges that come with that. Another thing that just made me so proud of our NEST project coming up. If these kids are behind, what a perfect timing for us to put a nest in at Martin Elementary to try to get that gap lessened. So I'm really thankful that we're going to be able to hopefully help in some of that. And also, when I'm thinking, we honor each of our speakers with a donation to the Rotary Foundation, and the Rotary Foundation has 7 areas of focus. And I'm also so glad you brought this out, because missing PE, missing the school nurse. I mean, I marked 3 areas that your donation just for kids in school could benefit: disease prevention and treatment, maternal and child health, and basic education and literacy. And you don't think about school doing all those things. So I'm just really thankful for you today to reminding me of that. And we will make a donation to the Rotary International Foundation in your name for speaking with us today. Thank you. Coming up, please consider making a donation to Build Our Nest. Also, there's still time to give some money to the End Polio Now campaign, where you can really multiply your donation. $100 turns into $750. So that really makes you feel like you're doing something for the world in that case. The board of directors will meet here at the hotel next Tuesday, May 25th. The board meetings are open to all members. We just need you to know that you're coming, so we'll know to have a seat for you, and also to have be prepared for a meal. Our next speaker is, we have a couple things going on. Next week, we're going to have a reading and a vote on a memorial resolution for former Rotarian Buzz Brown. So please be here for that. And our speaker next Wednesday is going to be Dr. Rudy Sotolongo. And he's a local cardiologist and a vascular surgeon, and he has a very interesting program to present on saving limbs for patients. In closing, thank you for attending Rotary today. Let's close our meeting together by standing and reciting the four-way test to the things that we say, think, and do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build good and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you all for coming today. Thank you to our guests. Sign up at the back. Sherry Pierce is asking for you to sign up for our service projects. Go out and find opportunities to lead and serve.